Well, good morning. Appreciate you coming out. If you're here for the first time, I do appreciate you taking that step. I know sometimes it's hard to walk into a newer place. If you're joining us online, we're grateful too that you've chosen to do that. So when we first moved to Lincoln, I had a job in South Lincoln, so we built a house down in a cul-de-sac down there, and those neighbors we kind of grew up with. So every 4th of July, we did fireworks together. And if you do fireworks, you know there's a rule. You need to be careful with fireworks. You need to be careful with fireworks. Well, we had done this for years and years and years. And so we're out one of these years in the cul-de-sac, and one of the Roman candles is lit, and it falls over, and it shoots 5 or 6 things, whatever it shoots, right into somebody's garage. And all of us think, oh my. You know, certainly there's a gas can in there, probably, there's a lawnmower, there's cars. If the things catch, this could be an explosive deal. I mean, a house could go up in flames. What kind of, well, fortunately nothing happened. But we all went and closed our garage doors after that, I'll tell you that. But just for a second, you let down on be careful with fireworks. Well, we almost had a disaster. Well, God's clear. He's good. He calls us to follow Him, to obey Him. When we rebel, when we do our own thing, the Bible calls that sin. Just as the letting down and being careful with fireworks almost cost us, when we compromise our obedience to God, we play with similar kind of cost. And what I want us to think about this morning is what happens? What happens when we compromise our obedience to God? So if you got a Bible, as Nate said, if you'd open that to 2 Samuel 14, we're going to go all the way through that chapter and wrestle with this question, what happens when we compromise our obedience to God? If you haven't been with us, for the last few months, number of months, we've been in the books of 1 and 2 Samuel in a series entitled Reliant. It's a story of Israel transitioning from a loose federation of states to a monarchy, and God trying to teach them to be reliant on Him rather than themselves, because they wanted a king. They thought, we need a king to be secure like everybody else. God said, no, what you really need is you need me. No, we need a king, we need a king. God said, okay, so you can learn your lesson. I'm going to give you your king, and you're going to find out what you really need is me. So the first king's name was a guy named Saul. He didn't do very well. When he was anointed, it was real clear, you don't have absolute authority here. Saul acted as if he did and disobeyed God twice, and God said, we're moving on. And he anointed David to be king. I don't think Saul knew that, but he realized David's popularity was rising. David was the one who dropped Goliath. And so there begins this chase, somewhere from 10 to 13 years. And in that, David learned a lot about trusting God. He had some failures. But eventually, Saul dies in battle at the hand of the Philistines, and after a civil war, David becomes king. And Israel begins to thrive. God's hand is on David, and he expands the borders. And for the first time in history, Israel is living in the promised land without having to worry about being raided by foreign armies. But on this occasion, the troops went out, and David stayed home, and he saw a woman bathing, and he thought, I want to take her. Now, before Israel went into the promised land, Deuteronomy 17:17, God had said, let not the king multiply wives for himself. And David had disobeyed this. He'd taken this, he had a bunch of wives. Dude, you're going to be busy a long time with all your wives and concubines. You don't need one more. But he took her. And he laid with her, and she turned up pregnant. And that was an issue because her husband was out at battle. So it's going to look bad. How'd you get pregnant? So David thinks, I'll call the old boy back. He'll go sleep with his wife, and we'll problem solved. But the guy named Uriah was so honorable, he said, if my soldiers aren't sleeping with their wives, I'm not doing it. David thought, whoa, we'll come back to my place tomorrow night. And he got him drunk. But Uriah still wouldn't do it. So he sent Uriah back with sealed orders to the commander Joab. And Joab was told, you put Uriah at the front and you pull back. Basically, he ordered his murder. It's what happened, and he married Bathsheba, and he thought he got away with it, but God saw what was going on. He sent him the prophet Nathan. And Nathan said, this is a bad deal. David confessed his sin. Nathan said, God has forgiven you. You're still in good standing with God, but you're going to live the consequence of your sin. The first consequence is that child you conceived, that child will die. Second consequence was the sword will never depart from your family, David. And that's what we saw last week. Amnon had eyes for his half-sister, Tamar, and he raped her. And that demanded some kind of action, but because David's moral credibility was gone, he did nothing. So Absalom, the full brother of Tamar, took things into his own hand and he murdered him. Now David's got another problem on his hand. Murder's you just can't do that. But again, David's moral credibility has been washed away because he ordered the murder of an innocent man. So he does nothing. And Absalom flees because he knows under the law he's to be executed. And we ended with saying David's heart longed for his son Absalom. Many of us who have kids understand that. Our hearts long for our kids. Both our kids are out of the house, but I'm glad they're still in town, so I get to see them. Well, David's son is away under duress, and that's where we start in chapter 14, verse 1. It says, Now Joab, who's the commander of the armies, the son of Zeruiah, perceived the king's heart was inclined toward Absalom. David's grieving this separation. He's grieving this distance. So, verse 2, Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from her and said to her, Please pretend. Okay, so focus on that word. This is a pretend. What's going to happen? Well, what's going to be pretended? We'll find out. Please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments now and do not anoint yourself with oil, but be like a woman who has been mourning for the dead many days. Then go to the king and speak to him in this manner. So Joab put the words in her mouth. Hey, I want you to carry out this act, this fictitious act. I want you to do it. And it's going to involve you acting very, very sad. Well, we find out more, starting in verse 4. Then when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face on the ground and prostrated herself and said, Help, O king. The king said to her, What's your trouble? She answered, Truly, I'm a widow, for my husband is dead. Your maidservant had 2 sons, but the 2 of them struggled together in the field, and it was no one to separate them, so one struck the other and killed him. Can you follow what's going on here? Now behold, the whole family has risen against your maidservant, and they say, Hand over the one who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed, and destroy the heir also. Thus they will extinguish my coal which is left, so as to leave my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth. It's not exact parallel, but here's what is paralleled. In this fictitious case, she had 2 sons. One son murdered the other. And she said, Boy, the law demands his execution. Murder's never okay. But if you take him away, if he is executed, my coal will go out. Remember, women had no rights. They were dependent on a husband who's dead, apparently, sons, and this would be the other son. And I would grieve. And people are demanding justice for this murder. Oh, king, can you do something? Now, there's quirks and parts of the law which allow for mercy, and I won't go into those now. But she's thinking, if the king can do something, maybe I don't have to lose my son. Verse 8, Then the king said to the woman, Go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you. The woman of Tekoa said to the king, O my lord, the king, the iniquity is on me and my father's house, but the king and his throne are guiltless. So the king said, Whoever speaks to you, bring him to me, and he will not touch you anymore. Then she said, Please let the king remember the Lord your God, so that the avenger of blood will not continue to destroy, otherwise they will destroy my son. And here's the takeaway. And he said, As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. David's the big dog. He has the final word. He decides, and here's what he's decided. Your son will not face judgment for his murder. Not one hair of his head will fall to the ground. Well, given what's going on, we think the woman's good. I mean, she got what she wanted. Thank you, king. Peace out. It's not quite what happens. Then the woman said, verse 12, Please let your maidservant speak a word to my lord the king. Like, what do you want? You just got clemency for your son. You want to speak a word. Well, okay. And he said, Speak. Verse 13. The woman said, Why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? Whoa. This took a turn. We were talking about me and my son, and so David thought we were talking about you and your son. Now you're turning to me. I'm doing something against the people of God? For in speaking this word, the king is the one who is guilty. Wait a minute, I was just Listen to your story. How? In that the king does not bring back his banished one. David, this story was never about me. It was about you. And you, David, are sinning against the people of Israel. Because you are so distraught over your son being away. You're not functioning as king. Verse 14. For we will surely die and are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. And this is a local proverb that talks about death is certain. But, she says, yet God does not take away life, but plans ways so that the banished one will not be cast out from him. Hey, David, God didn't take Absalom's life. Who are you to take Absalom's life? She makes her point in verses 15 to 17 by returning to her fictitious case. Now, the reason I've come to speak this word to my lord, the king, is that the people have made me afraid. So your maidservant said, let me now speak to the king. Perhaps the king will perform the request of his maidservant. For the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy both me and my son from the inheritance of God. Then your maidservant said, please let the word of my lord the king be comforting. For as the angel of God, so is my lord the king to discern good and evil. May the Lord your God be with you. David, you spoke a word of clemency for a brother who murdered another brother in a fictitious story. Why don't you apply that in your own life? You got this son who's living away because he's afraid to come back because he knows he faces execution for the murder of Amnon. You just said in my fictitious case, it's okay. Why won't you do that with your son Absalom? Well, now David's got a question. Verse 18, the king answered, said to the woman, please do not hide from me anything from me that I am about to ask you. And the woman said, let my lord the king please speak. So the king said, is this the hand of Joab with you in all this? And the woman replied, as your soul lives, the Lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. Indeed, it was your servant Joab who commanded me, and it was he who put all these words in the mouth of your maidservant in order to change the appearance of things. Your servant Joab has done this, but my Lord is wise, like the wisdom of the angel of God, to know all that is in the earth. Why would David have guessed Joab? My speculation is Joab kept saying, you're not functioning. Why don't you bring the guy back? Why don't you bring the guy back? And so this was just another time. Rather than a direct approach, we'll do an indirect approach. Let me tell you the story. You pronounce clemency here. Why won't you pronounce clemency there? Apparently, this moves David. Because in verse 21, it says, then the king said to Joab, behold, now I will surely do this thing. Go therefore, bring back the young man Absalom. Joab fell on his face to the ground, prostrated himself, and blessed the king. Then Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, O my lord the king, and that the king has performed the request of the servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem, and they lived happily ever after. Problem solved, right? We've got Absalom back. And David's heart has been longing for him, and it's been taking a while, and took this story. Verse 24 starts with the word however. That means we're not going to get what we expect. However, the king said, let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom turned to his own house and did not see the king's face. Yeah, he can come back. You bet he can come back, but I'm not going to see him. He was living, he was living in Mexico someplace, and now he's 2 blocks down, but I'm not going to see him. It doesn't seem to solve a lot. I'm within proximity, but I don't have a relationship. Verses 25 to 27 are an aside about Absalom. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It says, now in Israel there was no one as handsome as Absalom. And when we read that makes us think of our student pastor, Nate Gottschall. Because we know that there is no one in all of Israel as handsome as Nate, in all of Nebraska as handsome as Nate. It just came to mind. It's one of those things that just came upon me. Absalom, that's what he gets for making fun of me on the North Pointe Community Highlights. That's what he gets. I've got the pulpit. But it says people look to Absalom because of his appearance. He was noticed. That will come into play next week. So that's the summary of verses 25 to 27. Verse 28 says this. Now Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem and did not see the king's face. Oh man, I'm glad I came back. I'm living right down the street, but I still can't see my dad. What was the point? You might ask. Absalom's asking that question. Verse 29, then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come. So he sent him again a second time, but he would not come. Now, Absalom wants to know, you brought me back, what's the deal? Therefore he said to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Now, I grew up in a metro area all my life, okay? I haven't farmed. But I would think if you farmed and you plant and you weed and you do spray this stuff, and your crop comes up and somebody sets it on fire, that's a lot of money going up. You guys are ag people, aren't you? You guys are ag. That's bad, isn't that? You don't want that. We have a PhD in agriculture there to confirm that with me. But he finally gets Joab's attention. It said, then Joab arose, came to Absalom at his house, and said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? Great question. Absalom answered Joab, because I sent for you, saying, come here, that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there. Now, therefore, let me see the king's face. If there's an iniquity in me, let him put me to death. I want to see the king, and if I need to die, I'll die. Verse 33, so when Joab came to the king and told him, he called for Absalom. Thus he came to the king and prostrated himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. And we don't know any more about how that meeting went. I want us to think about Absalom for just a minute. There was murder within his family. His half-brother rapes his sister. There's a moral vacuum. Nothing is done because David has lost moral credibility. It takes 2 years, but Absalom says, well, I'll take care of that, and I'll commit murder. Yeah, you just can't be doing that. Then later he's sent away, and he comes back, and he waits for 2 years. I want to see the king. I can't get the king. Hey, Joab, will you do it? I'll just set his field on fire. What gives with Absalom? You know what he appears to me? To be someone who as a child was never disciplined. No one told him no. So I'll just do what I want when I want. And the one that needed to be disciplining was his dad. But his dad lost all kinds of moral credibility with him, had public knowledge, man. You had an affair. When the woman turned up pregnant, you murdered the husband. Why would I listen to you? Nathan said, the sword's never going to depart from your family. It's just the way it is. David, you're living the consequence of your sin, and it's out of control. See, we're wrestling with this question. What happens when we compromise our obedience to God? Let me tell you, disobeying God sets in motion consequences we can't control. Your disobedience of God, my disobedience of God, we're playing with fire. It sets in motion consequences we can't control. Like the Roman candle, shoot, once that thing's shot in the garage, if it sets a lawnmower or a car on fire, it sets in motion consequences we can't control. Let me be clear. David is still God's anointed. Still God's chosen. If you're worth 2 Samuel 7, God wanted to build a temple, and God said, no, I'm going to build a house for you. You're going to have an eternal kingdom. Your great son, his name's going to be Jesus, and millions and billions of people are going to come into my kingdom through him. David, Jesus will be known as the Son of David. Jerusalem will be the city of David. You'll still have a place, but you won't avoid the consequences of your actions. If you heard me speak before, you know, as a junior, I was caught with a bunch of guys with beer, and we went to the principal's office, and I got suspended, and other guys didn't, and there was a whole story there. But there was a meeting that Monday afternoon with the athletic director. The athletic director brought us all in. Our swim coach was there. The sponsor who caught us was there. And he said to us, man, you guys are great kids. I'm really sad you're here. I hope this won't happen again. The student-athlete handbook is clear. If you are in a place where beer is being served, first time, it's a one-meet suspension. And your inter-squad meet, the black and gold meet, then that's not going to cut it. Try not to let this happen again, because the next time it's 2 meets, the next time you do it, you're suspended for the year. We believe in you guys, great kids. You know, you keep practicing, keep working out, but you'll miss that first meet. And sure enough, I mean, coach never said a word about it, and this man was a surrogate father to me. I hated disappointing him. And the first meet was an invitational. It was out of town. He let us go. It was an overnight. It was fun. But we didn't swim. I think there were 20 teams there. I don't know. We would have won it. We would have been in the top 5. I think we finished 18th. There was a ripple effect. 10 events. If you take out diving, there's 10 events in swimming. In 5 of those events, our number 1 swimmer was suspended. So guess what? We didn't do very well. We lived the consequence of our actions. Still part of the team, still surrogate father to me, still. That's where David is. Beloved by God, anointed by God, but living the consequences. And these consequences are only going to get worse. We're going to hear more from Absalom next week. The undisciplined kid who takes what he wants. But you know, it makes us wonder where might we be compromising in our obedience? Perhaps you're a person with an anger issue. The Bible says you need to bring that before the Lord. And what is it that's driving your anger? Because that anger doesn't honor God. I grew up with an angry dad. And I sought distance whenever I could. I would tell you my best years growing up were my 8th grade and junior year. Because he was out of town. He would take another job in another city, and we were waiting for my brother to finish his senior year or to sell the house, and those were my best years. Beginning of my sophomore year in college, they moved away, and I was relieved. And I honored my dad. I tried to keep a relationship, but that volatility, yeah, I'm just keep a little distance. If you're a person with an anger issue, that's a consequence. I'd beg you to bring that anger before the Lord because it's costing you. If you're on a job, you got a business partner, you got caught embezzling money, it's going to be a long time before you get your business partner's trust back. Well, I just want, no. That's a consequence. You're no longer trustworthy. The Bible talks about being very careful about going into debt. I had a friend years ago who had his own business, and he took on too much debt, and he said, Andy, I'm no longer the boss of this business. The bank is. The bank tells me what I can do and what I can't do. We're told as people to find our worth in Christ, not in other people's approval, not in this or not in that. Perhaps you're one of those people that's easily offended. Somebody didn't say hi, somebody didn't say this, say that. And you notice people are pulling back. They walk on eggshells around you. There are consequences to insecurity. People are uneasy. Christ calls us to bring our security into Him. I could go on, and I won't. But sin has consequences. Can we be forgiven? Can we be restored? Absolutely. But we live the consequences of those actions. I don't know about you, but as I read David's story, I don't want to go that way. I want to avoid that as much as I can. Where do we look? What do we do? Well, I'd suggest where we look is not another person. Because if David teaches us anything, he teaches us humans are fallible. Remember, David's the one, when God rejected Saul, he said, I'm going to find a man after my own heart. And that was David. And yet we've seen this failure from David. If you weren't with us earlier, when he was being chased by Saul, he lied about the nature of his mission to one of the priests, and as a result, 85 priests and their families were slaughtered. And David said, that's on me, my lie. Later, when David was being chased, he chose to go live with the Philistines, the enemy, in order to cover his tracks. He made raids on foreign people, told the Philistine king, I'm raiding the Jewish people. Took lives to cover his lie. And by the way, we're not done with David. We'll get to the end of 2 Samuel. We'll see that he takes a census because he's insecure about the might of his nation, and God will bring judgment on the nation. David is a flawed person. So when we're looking at our disobedience and these issues that happen at a soul level, please don't look to another person. You can't put your ultimate trust in your spouse or your parents or your boss or your kids or your pastor or your classmates or your friends. Can you love them and be committed to them? Absolutely. But they're flawed. Just like you're flawed, just like I'm flawed, just like David's flawed. Our ultimate trust is in one named Jesus. Now we've seen God's best. David failed miserably. Jesus didn't. John 8, he's talking among his enemies, and he's explaining what's going on with him. It says this, and he, the Father who sent me being Jesus, is with me. He has not left me alone. Listen to what Jesus says. For I always do the things that are pleasing to him. Jesus said, everything I do is pleasing to the Father. That's the guy we need to be hooking up with. Right in the same passage, Jesus is in an intense disagreement with the religious leaders, and he's just told them that their father is the devil, because the devil's a liar and they're liars, and so there's not a lot of good vibes, a lot of good feelings going on between Jesus. And right after saying that, he says this, John 8:46, which one of you convicts me of sin? Really? He said that among his enemies, who he just offended by saying, you guys are a bunch of liars and your father's the devil. Which one of you convicts me of sin? I wouldn't say that to my closest friends. I wouldn't say that to my family. Oh, Dad, we got a lot of lists. We got a lot of time. How much time you got? Jesus is saying this because he's sinless. That's the one we need to be hooking up with. I don't want to go the way of disobedience. I don't want these consequences that are out of control. I'm going toward Jesus. How about you? We need him desperately. Oh, I need to get to heaven. Yeah, you need to get to heaven, but you need him today. And you need him tomorrow. You need him every day. So we don't have to walk this way. He's the solution to our sin problem. So the sickest I've been, if you've heard me preach, was the last year I was in Russia, and last month I was in Russia, so I came in from Siberia, and I was having stomach issues, so I went to the American Medical Clinic in Moscow. I thought, finally, I'll get before a doctor, and he'll give me a solution here. And he asked me to give him his symptoms, and he said, yeah, I mean, that seems like a lot like Giardia. We got a lot of Giardia out there in that Siberia area, so you take this 3-day regimen of pills, and you should be good. Finally, I got a solution. So I take my 3-day regimen of pills, and I'm not good. So that's frustrating. I'm looking for a solution to this. Doc, can you give me one? So I call the office. Hey, the whole Giardia thing didn't work. We'll come back in and see us. The doctor says, well, I think, what we need to think about is a parasite. So that will involve you bringing in a stool sample for 3 days in a row. So I'm cruising the Moscow metro with my little stool sample 3 days in a row. Put that clinic on there. And then I meet with the doctor, and they say, no parasite. My stomach still hurts. I need a solution here. This is frustrating. And what I would eventually find out, it was stress-driven. About that time, we're going home. We're 5.5 weeks from getting married, and my future mother-in-law gets me an appointment with a gastroenterologist in Northeast Alabama. I find finally, we'll get an expert, and he'll tell me what's going on. So I tell him all that I went through, and he says, Andy, I think you got great care. They did exactly what I would do. I would check for Giardia. I'd check for a parasite. Okay, doc, now what? He says, your symptoms are so nonspecific, I'm not sure what to tell you. Oh, man, that's not what I wanted to hear. We could draw for spastic colon, we could draw irritable bowel, but I mean, the tests in there are really invasive. Unless this gets really bad, I don't think you want to go that way. Man, I wanted a solution, and 3 times I'd hoped and didn't get it. Like I said, eventually this was stress-related and it just went away. But I'm asking you, when it comes to your disobedience and sin issues, are you like me? That day with myself, are you going from this solution to that solution to that one? Man, can somebody fix this for me? I want to tell you, there is one who can fix it. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. He's overcome death and he's overcome sin. He is the beginning of the solution to your disobedience issue and my disobedience issue. Let's not go this way, where we're dealing with consequences that are out of our control. Let's go to the one who says, I came that you might have life and might have it abundantly. Would you pray with me? Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for your word, that it's true. And we're seeing someone beloved by you, living with the consequence of his sin. We're grateful that you have offered us a solution, and that solution's name is Jesus, the crucified Son of God, risen from the dead. Thank you that he is the one who said, I do everything, I always do that which is pleasing to the Father. He is the one who's asked, who convicts me of sin? And the answer was silence. Lord, that we take residence with him, that we'd invite him into the deepest recesses of our soul so we don't have to live the out-of-control consequences of disobedience. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.